Hello everyone, my name's Cliff and welcome back to my channel. This is Cliff's Dark Gems. And today, oh wait, I forgot something. And if you're new here, welcome for the first time. And today we're going to talk about my favorite strong female protagonists in horror novels. Stay tuned. Okay everyone, just a few things before we get going. First of all, I'm not going to be holding up books for this evening. That's because I'm talking more about the characters rather than the books. And also it's quite important to point out, in some cases, in the end I will warn you, there might be a few spoilers, so I'll let you know. I am talking about characters in a book, or a character that has a specific character arc. From the beginning to the end of the book, and it might give details of their character away, so I know that people don't really want to hear that, but I'll let you know when that happens. For the rest of the case, I'm going to try and keep it quite brief and just explain what I love about the character. Another thing, this is my opinion, there are books I've left out on purpose because I've talked about them time and time again, but also I don't want to carry on going with that, and I might give a special mention to one, but then you might not watch the video, but I'm going to do it anyway. But yeah, firstly, what makes a strong character? Now, strong is not just physical strength, where you kick ass, you can beat all your opponents physically. It's about emotional courage, it's about emotional strength in the face of adversity and trauma. And if you think about a horror novel, there is a lot of trauma, there's a lot of very extreme situations that arise, and this is the case for a lot of these characters. And in addition to that, you need some kind of intellectual strength as well, where you can solve problems and you're wise, and you can make good decisions at the time that'll get you out of a situation. For me, this is being a strong character, and there's perhaps a lot more to talk about in terms of that, but yeah, I don't want this video to go on too long, so let's get on with it. Okay, now I was not going to make a special mention, but I overlooked the book, and perhaps I overlooked it on purpose, but I'm going to mention it, and yeah. And there's probably a lot of other ones as well, but It by Stephen King, Beverly Marsh. She has to go through suffering, she has to go through so much trauma from her home life, with an abusive father, from being bullied at school, with some vicious bullying, and of course she has to face up against a supernatural monster. And this trauma follows her to adulthood, where she has to deal with an abusive husband. And I'm not going to say anything more about that. Talked about spoilers, but yeah, she's an awesome character. Okay, let's get on to the list. Number 1, we got Nosferatu by Joe Hill, and an awesome character called Vic McQueen. Now, growing up, Vic McQueen had a very troubled childhood. Her parents fought the whole time. She actually couldn't stand her mother, so she was very, very troubled. She only had a bike to keep her company, and the knowledge that that could take her places. And then she meets up with this guy called Johnny Max. He's a vicious arsehole, and supernatural, whilst he's just a terrible villain. And she gets captured and she escapes him, and it's quite a hectic scene. And yeah, I'm not going to go into much more detail. But when she becomes an adult, she suffers scars from her childhood. She develops mental problems. She is a flawed character. And all I can say is that she has to overcome those problems. She has to show grit and determination, because Manx has taken a child off to Christmas land, and so she has to go and get him back. And yeah, she's a tough character, she's a gritty character, but she's also a very flawed character, which is what I like. A lot of these characters are kind of vulnerable, but they, make do with what they've got. And yeah, she's kind of determined and tough, and I like her. In third place, we got Muriel from The Horror by David Sodergren, and she's an elderly woman basically fighting for her rights, fighting for her freedom to live in the place of her birth and die in the place of her birth. And she's determined, and basically these property developers, it's a small coastal town in Scotland, they're buying up all the properties to build a golf estate. And she refuses to budge. And I just loved her as a character, especially because she's elderly as well. You don't get that in fiction very often. And yeah, when they try to double the offer, she tells them to stick the offer where the sun don't shine, which I like. And now also, she's being harassed, she's being bullied, and it intensifies, where it's becoming a danger for her. But she will not budge. And then eventually she gets kind of help in the most unlikeliest of places, coming from the ocean. Look, it's a very weird story, folk horror tale, and I loved it. And I love this character in the way that she was portrayed. She was a really strong female protagonist. Okay, next up we have Rose Madder by Stephen King. This is not a favourite Stephen King book of mine. I thoroughly enjoyed the first 2/3 of the book before it kind of changed. But I have to admit, Rose Madder is an awesome character. And she's a woman who's been in a 14-year-old relationship. She's been married to this psychotic husband for 14 years. And he has beaten her emotionally and psychologically, abused her physically. And yeah, the book opens with one of the most traumatic scenes I've ever read about in a novel. And just basically, I'm not giving away spoilers, it's in the first couple of pages, but she's pregnant. And the husband, Norman, only happens to be a cop, beats the living crap out of her, and yeah, you can guess what happens. And of course he can cover it up because he's got ties. Now, she decides to leave, which I think is incredibly brave and courageous of her, considering what she's been through, and also considering the fact that she's been in a 14-year long relationship with this psycho. So to decide to leave on the drop of a hat is dangerous, it's terrifying. And she decides to make a better life for herself. And she goes off, but of course, being a cop, Norman, who's one of Stephen King's most insane criminals, decides to follow her and pursue her and stop her and damage her. And really, yeah, there's a character arc that's very interesting here, but she's on my list because of in the first chapter and how difficult it is for an abused woman to leave an abusive relationship. I think this makes it very powerful, that she has to make that decision first of all, that I have to get out. And how many times has she been thinking that over the years? But it's kind of been impossible to do. So I suppose when she lost her baby at the beginning of the novel, that was a final straw for her. So yeah, you've got Rose Madder. Okay, and I cannot do this list without mentioning Coraline by Neil Gaiman. Yes folks, this is an awesome YA book, but it's perfect for adults as well. Really, it's just a wonderful, wonderful horror tale, creepy, spooky, without being overly gory or anything like that. No terrifying, crazy stuff, but it's just a wonderful tale. And we got a real kind of spunky heroine who is just so kind of brave in the face of adversity and smart, incredibly smart. And basically, it starts off where she's really bored. It's raining outside, she's not getting attention from her parents, who are working too hard, telling her to go count the windows in the new house, And she finds a little doorway, a little passage leads into another place, the other place, a house that looks just like hers, with another mother and another father with black buttons on their eyes. And everything seems perfect, but yeah, she's just an awesome character. And there's a point in the novel where she kind of gets into trouble. That's a very, very minor spoiler, but she's got to kind of save her mother and father. And in doing that, she's got to play a game. She's outwitting her opponent. It's a supernatural creature, kind of terrifying. And yeah, she's got to show her smarts and her courage. And she's kind of this kind of character, this little girl that's just like, yeah, I can do anything, that kind of thing, that attitude. So I really enjoyed her. That is Coraline. Not Caroline, Coraline people. And the movie's awesome too. You know, people have decided to add something very quickly. My wife just sort of made an interesting comment. She said they should actually one day make Coraline into a real movie. It could be difficult on some levels, but I think it could be really interesting. I mean, if you can make something like a Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, something they did, then surely you can make Coraline a real movie. Okay, I could not leave this character off the list. And we've got The Silence of the Lambs, by Thomas Harris. And we've got Clarice Starling. Now she's just so kick-ass and awesome, but she's also very, very vulnerable throughout the film in a number of different ways, which makes this a very good movie and film. And number one, she is an FBI trainee, and when this book was written in the 80s, and I think more in the book, you see it more in the book than in the movie, but you see it in both. And she is basically choosing a career in a world of men. She has to suffer sexism, the male gaze. At one point it's kind of uncomfortable. That's one thing she has to suffer. She also is vulnerable to Hannibal Lecter. Kind of gets inside her head. It brings up a traumatic childhood. And all sorts of anxieties that she has. And thirdly, she's also vulnerable to actual physical danger. And in all of these cases, she has to display determination, courage, grit, and at times be really kick-ass when the need arises. And in addition to this, I just think she's a very relatable human character. So you kind of feel for her. So even though she's tough, she's vulnerable. She's fragile, but she's really strong. So she's just a perfect female protagonist. Okay, the sixth character is China Shepherd, and she's from Intensity by Dean Koontz. Now, I've mentioned her before, and she's a favorite of mine. She's just so tough and resilient. She had a traumatic childhood as well. Really messed up parents, and she had to learn how to survive and hide and live for another day. And she almost gained a kind of almost sixth sense in terms of smelling out danger. And she's up against, because it's a very simple story at its heart, she's up against a serial killer, psychopath, one of the worst I've ever read about, called Edgar Vess. Is it Vess or Voss? Vess, I think. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, let's call him Edgar Vess, who likes to live with intensity. Doesn't give a damn about who he hurts and murders, tortures, kills. He doesn't care. He just takes it all in. And now, basically, this woman is in a cat and mouse game with this killer. And not only does she need to be determined, brave, courageous, resilient, problem solving, all this stuff as well, there's something else about her that's special. And she knows that this killer is keeping a young girl, is basically imprisoned a young girl, probably torturing her. Happy to see a photograph. They get kind of close in weird ways. And yeah, instead of running for help, okay, that might be a weakness for some people, or instead of running for safety, what she does is she pursues this killer because she wants to save this girl. So that displays compassion. It displays kind of a selflessness, just desire to help others, which is kind of admirable in a character, a strong character. Yeah, so that is China Shepherd. Okay, next up we got Mexican Gothic by Sylvia Moreno Garcia, and I'm talking about Nomi. Now this is a very strange choice for some, perhaps, but she's a tough character. And it starts off where she's called to help her niece, her cousin, who's basically in this not a very good relationship, and up at this high castle in Mexico. And she has to run off and save her or help her. And it seems like an odd decision because, and also I was thinking, come on, not her. She's a socialite, she's spoilt, she's rich, she's got money, she goes from party to party, likes her lipstick, likes all that kind of thing. And yet she's the one that's called out to help. And so I was thinking, no, I'm not going to enjoy this. This protagonist is terrible. But then when she gets to the house and when you get to know this woman, you see how strong and brave and kind of strong-willed she is. You kind of realize, yeah, this is a really awesome protagonist. Not just in the way she helps her sister, but in the way she's dealing with this house and this very creepy villainous family and all the obstacles she faces. She's worthy of being on this list. So yeah, that is, and I have to say the name again, sorry, Nomi, Mexican Gothic, just for you, Michael. Okay, in the 8th position we got Jane Slayer, nice little monster mishmash. And I just want to say, if you're a fan of the original Jane Eyre, this might not work for you. However, as a student, I studied Jane Eyre, and it was one of my favourite classic novels. A difference, obviously, with this one is that Jane Eyre becomes a kickass heroine, basically destroying zombies and vampires, and yeah, you can hold her own. She's strong physically and just awesome character. But in addition to that, we've got to add that in growing up she faced her trials and tribulations, so she had to kind of have a certain level of courage and determination to get through all of that as well. Also when she goes to this boarding school, so her life experiences are not easy until she gets to that age where, well, she falls in love, but she's kick-ass as well. Love it. Okay everyone, for these final two, I don't feel that I've given away any spoilers up until this point. I think people might be upset with me if I don't say this, and I'm going to talk about these characters maybe in a little bit more detail, but also to look at their character arc, because these are my favorite, it's a favorite book and a favorite series. And yeah, I don't want to disappoint people with spoilers. I don't like doing that. So let's start off with Swan Song by Robert McCammon, my favorite book. And there's a huge array of different characters, huge cast of characters. And one of my favorite is Sister. And originally when we meet her, she's a homeless, bagless lady. And she's called Sister Creep. And she has this thing about keeping her possessions. And after this nuclear holocaust, we learn that she's got very deep, dark secrets, traumatic secrets. And she ends up being a very strong character in this book. Very likable, very loyal, a very powerful character in this book. And also she has to keep something hidden from, which draws attention to her. And this thing pursues her throughout the book, but she's got to protect it, and that's her job. And she knows she knows what she's about. And by the end of the novel, she just becomes a pillar of strength amongst her friends, amongst other awesome characters. And yeah, I loved her to bits. So yeah, that was Sister. Okay everyone, I've saved what I think is actually the best for last, if I come to think about it. I mean, I looked at who's that character, Intensity. China Shepherd is probably my other favourite, and Vic McQueen. But this character is freaking awesome, and I'll tell you why. And if you haven't read The Dark Tower and you plan to read it by Stephen King, or let's say you're halfway through it and you invested in the characters, and you, let's just say if you haven't read the whole series and you plan to, then switch off now, please, please, please. Spoilers. Okay? Spoilers. Right? So switch off, and let me tell you about Susanna. Now when we first meet Susanna, she was basically a cripple. African American cripple, no legs. Ronan takes her out. Also, she had a split personality. So basically, her two personalities were Odetta Holmes and Detta Walker. Yeah, that's right. The one, kind of a vicious, foul-mouthed, wanting to do harm to white people, and the other, kind of the intellectual, good person. And they don't know about each other. And look, we learn through the course of the books. It takes a little while, not too long. We learn about why she becomes these kind of split personality. We learn how she becomes in a wheelchair, and we learn all of those things. And then later on, her mind does become whole again to a certain extent. We learn that as well. And also, but she's always going to be in the wheelchair. And she is part of the quartet of Roland. And she goes through trials and tribulations. And some of hers are far more terrifying than the other members of the quartet, in my opinion. And in order to survive those, she has to become incredibly resourceful, incredibly strong, and kind of powerful. And in her own right, by the end of the book, or towards the end of the book, she becomes a gunslinger of note. And what makes us more powerful, and what makes this character such a strong character, is how often in fantasy and in horror, or anywhere, you see a female character of color that is disabled that becomes a proficient gunslinger and fully kind of capable of protecting herself, and just a powerful character of spirit. Absolutely loved her. Look, I love all the characters in the Dark Tower series, but she's definitely right up there with my favorite. And her character arc is enormous. It's wonderful. I don't have time to go through everything now. But yeah, that is Susanna, who she becomes. Okay everyone, so those are my favorite female characters in female protagonists in horror fiction, horror novels. I know that I've left out a couple, maybe more than a couple, and I know you're going to point out some to me in the spaces down below. Be respectful, okay? These are just 10. I know there are plenty out there. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed my content. If you do, please be sure to like and subscribe. And until next time, keep those pages turning, and cheers.